Record. Okay. My name is Yong Mei Li. I'm District 38's training coordinator. It's a pleasure to have all our panelists and moderator here to share their experience as speech contestants. I can't wait to hear all the advice. Just a quick introduction. Mark Fennell will be our moderator, and I'm going to introduce Mark, and he's going to introduce the rest of the panelists. So Mark joined Toastmaster in 2009. In 2012, he competed at the speech evaluation contest and placed first at his club area and division level. In 2022, after joining Harleysville Toastmasters, he competed in the international speech contest and placed first at his club area and division with a third place finish in District 38. He's the author of Dad's Little Book of Wisdom, Earn More, Achieve More, and Live a Good Life, a book written with his children in mind about how to succeed in the professional world. Mark's favorite quote is, "Where there's nothing to lose by trying and everything to gain, by all means try." So I'm going to turn over the mic to Mark.
All right, thank you, Yong Mei. Yes, always good for quotes there then. Well, welcome. I know that we're glad to have all of you join us. This is a topic that is near and dear to many of our hearts, talking about how to compete at the International Speech Contest. And also beyond that, we take those type of life skills that we take from Toastmasters into the real world. So if you're facing a high stakes presentation, how to compete, how to bring your best, your A game. And I'm excited about having this group of panelists join us. So all of the panelists you have here have all won at last year's International Speech Contest level at their club, their area, and their division level before competing at the district level. So all very accomplished speakers. Yes, very much so. I think one of the things that we take away from it is you really gain by just jumping in and competing. That's where you are able to get outside your comfort zone and continue to raise your game. We're going to learn from each of them, but just going around in the room, we have Alex Laws, and Alex represents Toastmasters from Oracle and has been with Toastmasters 23 years. We have Shane Cohen. So Shane Cohen represents two Toastmasters for Greater Susquehanna Valley and Susquehanna area Toastmasters. They were Toastmasters for 10 years. Won last year at Division E, represented Toastmasters. In the previous year, in 2021, finished second place in the District 38 International Speech Contest. Andrea Engel represents two clubs, University City Toastmasters and Panorama Toastmasters. Been with Toastmasters for 4 years and won and represents Division C from last year. And she placed second in the District 38 International Speech Contest. Finally, George Phillip. George has been a member of Toastmasters for 22 years, starting out with Princeton Toastmasters and continued to move forward with Peak Performance Advanced Toastmasters. Last year, he represented Division F, and he placed first place in the District 38 International Speech Contest. So please help me welcome our panelists here first. So we all know that growth is on the other side of fear, but the first part of it is to come up with our topic and our speech. So first I'm going to have Alex, if you can just speak to what it took for you to come up with your speech topic, your theme, your title. You could just go ahead and begin with that. Alex?
Yeah, so I think being in Toastmasters long enough, I have learned to look at other people's speeches. When they give it in the club, they give a club speech, and I go up to them afterwards, and I'm like, you know what? That speech has international speech potential, and they don't realize it. They're like, oh, really? I'm like, well, come work with me or find someone to work with, and we'll tweak it. It needs to have a little bit of, house cleaning done to it to make it truly contest worthy, but you got the good bones. So I think just speaking and watching and attending, you kind of get a sense of what type of speech, what type of theme is going to resonate with people. So for me, I remember this story that my grandmother was told about my grandmother's side of the family that was just so bizarre. And I'm like, all right, so that's a catch. But then how do I just now make it back to the audience, right? So I have a good story as a hook. The audience is going to listen to it in theory, but now I have to come around with some sort of packaging at the very end that I could turn it back to you, the audience, and say, all right, this is, the meat that you can take from it. This is the little nugget you can take home and think about. This is the little tiny thing you can apply to your life. Now, as for the title, I always like to have a fun title. People will have their opinions on that. Mine was a train ride through the Dardanelles, and you're like, what the heck is that? Well, stay tuned and you will hear. So that's my philosophy on speech titles. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Alex. One piece of housekeeping we're going to do for running this panel is for the first half of it, have some questions. I'm going to go ahead and ask the panelists. Then we're going to take a pause. We're going to kind of shift over to some audience questions. And being the fact that it's Toastmasters, what I'd prefer is actually have you raise your virtual hand. We'll call on you, let you ask the question. If you're more comfortable, we can always just type it in, and Young May will help out with that as well. But thank you for that then, Alex. Shane, could you continue with that same question? How do you come up with your speech theme, title, topic?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So in my instance for the latest speech contest, I was originally planning a completely different topic and subject. But as I noted in my speech, I had cancer twice, testicular cancer. And I was not going to talk about it, but in talking to the cancer staff and medical professionals, they actually, when I was thinking about writing a book on the experience I had, they said this is a really important topic and you should really share this, and they encouraged me to go forward with the idea of like putting together some book on the topic. And so that kind of got me started down the path of like, okay, this is something that I think I want to create a speech around to share the experiences I've had, and particularly for males. There's oftentimes a hesitancy to seek out medical attention and medical help if you sense something wrong. So that was a really important part of why I wanted to give this speech in particular. That, and I had a close friend of mine, one of my best female friends, had passed away several years ago when she had symptoms of not feeling well, and she put off going to the doctor. She put off seeking help and finding that the assistance that she needed. Unfortunately, she waited a little long, and she had cancer, and the cancer had spread. So again, you never know what's going to happen. But had she gone a little earlier, you never know, that maybe the outcome could have been different. So that was what led to my particular topic. And yeah.
Thanks, Alex. So thanks, Shane. That no doubt is helping other people to see something, say something, and take action. So it's a great part of it then. Andrea?
So in my case, my speech title or my speech theme came before the idea to compete. So to say, I moved from Germany last year in June to Philadelphia and found myself in a completely different world, facing different challenges. And then I joined Toastmasters. One of my mentor then inspired me to compete, and I saw the speech theme being present in my life, just facing different challenges and choosing how to solve problems, how to face those challenges. That was something that I wanted to share with my audience. And with that, the speech theme came. About the title, I had a little bit different title before, but then actually Alex suggested that I might want to choose a title that doesn't reveal too much from my speech. So I changed the title, and then the title was more captivating and not that revealing anymore. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Andrea. One of the things that I love you just put it out there is the fact that Alex helped you. And I have to admit, that's one of the things I love personally about Toastmasters is how collaborative and how willing to share and generous everybody has been in helping everyone to continue to grow and get better. So I think that's a great testament then. But George, same question to you. How did you come up with your speech theme and topic?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. This is really exciting. my theme, what I've learned in giving speeches, particularly in contests, is that I try to speak from my heart, from messages that really, really are important to me and that resonate with me. And over the past really 2 years or so, I've been involved with a program online. And one of the messages that really resonates with me from this course that I'm taking is forgiveness. And it's everything to me right now in terms of who I am and what I'm doing. And because of that, that's where my initial theme came from. The idea of it's so important to forgive others, but actually more important to forgive ourselves. So that was the theme. And the title, my title was not quite right. And it's actually in the speech, I use an English accent because the teacher of this course happens to be English. And he did use that phrase in a conversation he and I had. So it just seemed to fit so well about forgiveness, because the idea was, well, everything I do, I tell myself, well, it's not good enough. It's not quite right. And the need for forgiveness in that particular area. So that's both the theme and the title all work together in that regard. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, George, what I love about it is I think that what you shared, as well as the other three panelists, in addition to sharing the what you came up with, all four of you shared essentially your why, what drove you to why you competed and what you spoke about. I think that's a great thing for the rest of the audience to kind of understand. That's where your passion was coming from. And I know for myself, what drove me was that wanting to share a certain message and be able to push myself beyond. So I think that's a great takeaway. One of the questions that I was asked as I was being put together this panel was around our practice time and how we go about practicing. Certainly it has a lot of practice. So one of the questions was, how much time did you spend practicing? I'm going to break that up into different segments as you continue to move up from a club and area to a division level. How much time and what did that practice time look like? So Andrea, would you take that one first, please?
Thank you, Mark, for that question. So I practiced a lot, really a lot. I began practicing maybe in December, and my first audience was my son, who was 10 months at that time. And it was very, very rewarding for me to practice in front of him, because I could practice every facial expression I wanted to and exaggerate it and make it really funny and fascinating for him. Later in the process, I would need to make it a little bit more moderate and smoother, because you don't want to over polish the speech and to exaggerate it. So I would practice in front of the mirror or a window when it's dark outside, so that you can see your reflection. And lastly, I would visit different clubs to practice in front of different audiences to get myself comfortable with the idea to give a speech to people I have never met before, or even more to the idea that I don't even know who is watching me. So that was very helpful. And that was maybe the last part of practicing for the speech contest. Back to you, Mark.
Yes, and I will say, after watching Andrea's speech, she does a phenomenal job with the gestures. That's certainly a standout. And one of the other things I really want to highlight that she talked about for everyone is the taking advantage of visiting other clubs and practicing in front of them. I know that was a huge, huge benefit to me. I'm sure other panelists as well. But Shane, could you go ahead and address that? How much time you've practiced and what that practice time looked like?
No, thanks, Mark. And something I've learned especially after I started to take the contest a little more seriously and wanting to, take full advantage of the opportunity. Right, earlier on, you can practice in both the clubs I'm in, and then I seek out friends of mine who I know are going to be open and honest with me, and I just kick around ideas. And particularly for this last contest, I prepared a completely different speech, and so it was a little last minute when it came to the club contest of giving the speech that I ended up giving. And so I had a lot of ideas or a lot of messages I could have conveyed, and so that was actually one of the challenges I had. What is the one key message, key takeaway that I want to provide to my audience? And so I was mainly practicing a lot too, just to get feedback on, how can I hone my message? What is the takeaway that you have as an audience member? How will this, yeah, how can I best help individuals by sharing my story and things like that. So I spend a lot of time with friends, family, and in the clubs that I'm in right at the get-go, just again trying to hone my message and what I want to convey, and within the the 7-minute time frame as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, then, Shane. Yeah, it takes a lot of time and practice to fit those in and continue to refine it down. George?
Yes, thank you, Mark. This I've competed in for many years in contests, and this year I decided to try something different, and that was ask for help. And that sounds so basic, but in reality, for me, I hadn't done that in the past. And what I mean by that is I wrote my speech, and Andrea, actually, I'd like to borrow your son to give facial expressions. That's an excellent idea, actually. That's really funny, but it makes perfect sense. But so I wrote this speech in early December and gave myself almost a month to practice, because for me, what I have to do first is I have to get the content down. And then once I get the content down, then I can start adding all the choreography, all the facial expressions, the movement. So for me, it's a two-step process. So I practiced the speech almost for a month before giving it in my club. But then after giving it in the club, I was starting to ask for feedback. So people who saw it in the club, I asked, what did you think? What can I improve upon? And then I started giving it to specific individuals who I knew were very polished and could give me very critical feedback, which again, I haven't done in the past. So each time I would give the speech in the club, then the area and the division, I was always asking for feedback, and I would pick out these mentors that I have and I would give them the speech. And from the club to the international, I had a totally different speech in terms of the stories that were in the speech, the body language that went with the speech, the opening changed almost 100%. So the speech really evolved, and I almost sat back and just watched it evolve because of all the feedback I was getting. And I was just willing to say, okay, I'm going to incorporate this feedback that I feel is relevant and works with my message and use it. And it was a really remarkable experience for me in that regard. And the speech I ended up with was so much better than the one I started with. But it was quite an experience just to watch this evolution and really just to let it happen. Mark,
Yes.
back to you.
Yeah, so George, just going back to that. So for those people who might be thinking, hey, I don't have a international speech winning competition speech that I can do, your encouragement would basically to be get started, because it's going to evolve over time with practice. Is that fair?
That's very fair. And make a point of that by asking for feedback, going to those individuals you know have experience and asking them, what did you think? Or even just give it to them personally and ask for feedback. But always ask for feedback. That's how you improve.
Super. Thanks, George. So Alex, the question to you then is the amount of practice time and how you saw your practice evolve as you went through the competing stages.
Okay, so very first, we got to back it up. You got to get your word count down. Word count down. Word count under 800. Word count under 800. Repeat with me, people. Word count under 800. Now, the reason why we say this is I could jam a whole lot of words in here and tell you, or I could just say word count under 800. So you got to get your speech tight, where you like it. Next began the shower, toilet, front seat phase of the speech practice. So this is where you're just saying the speech over and over and over in your head. And the reason you're doing this, you're getting the words right, you're getting the sequences right? After that, when you get that down, that's where I, stand in front of the mirror or in front of that big window, as Andrea said. And, that's where I was practicing, the gestures, the movement, the pauses, so I could see myself, I could be my own audience. Now, I was listening to George's feedback, and I have a love-hate relationship with that in terms of getting people to help you. The love part is, yes, you need people's feedback. Now, the problem is you win at the club, the very first thing you do is you send out the call for feedback to everyone. And someone says, your speech should be more red. And another one, your speech should be more green. And another one, your speech should be more blue. And you're like, oh, the hell am I doing? So the point is, feedback is good. if you can find, and I think George touched on this, trusted people who are smart and who are good, who can be your coach, I think that really helps. I think the problem is when you blend the pool with too many opinions, then you're kind of like, all right, what do I do? So get it down right, get the words right. And then here's the thing. There was so much stinking time in between this level, this level, this level. You really had time to reset and said, all right, maybe I can rework the beginning, you know, but you got to reach a point where you lock it down and say, this is the speech I'm going with. Back to you, Mark.
So Alex,
Oh,
I'm gonna
hold
go-
on. Word count 800, word count under 800, word count under 800. Thank you.
Alex, I'm going to come back to you as a follow-up to that because it's key. You get your feedback. You ultimately have to be the author. You have to discern and determine what the voice that you want to keep as authentic to it. As you continue to do all of that practice time over and over and over again, how do you prevent yourself from being bored with practice?
You know, you got to tell yourself you're good, and you got to tell yourself I have a good speech, right? So, you know, the video aspect of it was kind of different this time. In terms of, you know, I had a green screen behind me, it was all in video, so I could record it. And actually I had Andrea jump on and we would do my speech and she would do her speech, and then we would give a little back and forth. All right, you know, I like what you did this time better, blah, blah, blah. But you just, I don't know, you got to fall in love with your speech, right? And you just got to believe that it's good, and that kind of helps you to break away from your work, go up into the bathroom and say, I'm going to give it right now. You know, I have 10 minutes before my next meeting, but I'm going to give it and it's going to be good. That's my feedback.
Thanks, Alex. So we got the word count as we talked about. You got to keep your word count down. But now I'm going to go back to something that George alluded to in the last session, which was after you figured out your message, then the message is part of it. The other part of it is our body language, how we convey that, how we have the enthusiasm. George, you touched on that in terms of after you develop the speech, the choreography that you put up with that. Can you just elaborate a little bit more? Any tips for how you match up the choreography, voice inflections that go along with what you're putting together for your speech?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. To me, again, choreography or this idea of all the body language and vocal variety and facial expression is something that's very hard to judge yourself because you can give all you want this speech and think the body language is working perfectly, but it's not until you actually give it to a live person or an audience that you really get a reaction. So for me personally, again, it's a two-step process. So I get the content down and make sure it's working and like it's in time. So we have that issue. But then I do construct my own impression of what the body language could be to support it. That's purposeful. It's not just in there to be flashy, but then I give it to others, like in my club or even my spouse, my wife, or just people who can give me feedback, whether that felt right or that worked right. And I video it so I can actually see myself doing the body language that I think is going to be effective. So my struggle is always, I think it's perfect. I think my body language is excellent, but others don't. And that's when the feedback is really important. You have to be receptive. And this is what Alex said, you have to be receptive, but my take is always when someone gives me feedback, I know whether it's going to work with me and what I'm trying to accomplish or not. So some I just discard. It just goes away. It's like, thank you, but that's not going to work right now in this speech. And if it does feel like, if I do feel it's going to work, I incorporate it, both content and body language. So tape it, record it, get feedback from others who are watching you deliver the speech and make sure it's working together.
Thanks, George. So Shane, in terms of adding your body language and the gestures that go with it, can you kind of speak to your process in incorporating the two of them together?
Right. Thanks, Mark. I'd say, I mean, one of the things, you know, putting in my speech in particular, I personally do love props and I don't want to ever, you know, overuse. I know you could definitely overuse them, but I like coming up, yeah, like I love being creative and trying to incorporate props and things of that nature when possible. So I'm always thinking about when putting together the speech, how will this add? But ultimately, you don't want to use something just to use it, right? You want to make sure that how does this specifically add value to your main message and your speech content, right? So how, if it doesn't add value, discard it, right? If it doesn't add to the message, and I want something that's memorable, right? So when after you've heard my speech, I don't want you to walk away and forget the main message, right? So I'm hoping that, again, anything that will help to convey that something that's really sticky in the audience's mind that they hopefully won't forget. So that's one of the things that I try to incorporate, and I'm always proactively thinking about that as I'm putting together the speech content, right? How do I, again, make sure that this is sticky, if you will, within the audience's mind.
Fantastic. Yes, and I'm going to come back to sticky here in a little bit later, but I'll continue on this theme of gesture. So, Andrea, we already learned your secret sauce, which was everybody needs to have a baby in their audience, and that makes it perfect. Can you talk a little bit more about your process of gestures? You obviously had the baby feedback, and that was helpful, but could you kind of elaborate more about adding your gestures in with your speech?
Thank you, Mark. So I would differentiate maybe between specific gestures and general gestures. In my case, it was easy to add specific gestures. I was talking about the elevator and about the stroller, so it was easy to show what I'm trying to convey to my audience, because this was just the story I was telling. I had more difficulties to add more general gestures when I'm not actually showing anything with my hands, but just have to use them in order to keep the flow somehow. So that was more difficult for me to have my hands support what I'm saying, but not adding unnecessary information with the hands if not necessary. So that was more complicated. And for that, you can watch other speakers give speeches and see what they're doing with their hands. It becomes especially difficult in the Zoom box, because you don't want to lose or go way out of the box while you're giving the speech. So you need to practice in front of the camera. And what is also very important about the gestures is you need to know how much of your hands or your arms they're going to see on Zoom. So sometimes you have gestures that will not appear on screen. So you need to know that in advance where your Zoom box ends. So I would say that is something that we need to keep in mind for the virtual contest, especially. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Andrea. I love the aspect of knowing where your boundaries are. In one of the pieces, I believe it was the 2020 International Speech Contest winner, the first one that was being done in Zoom, where he was able to pop up in a certain corner, did a phenomenal job. One of the things that I learned, and for those of you that might be doing this as well, when I was originally practicing myself, I was practicing on Microsoft Teams. I found that Zoom is what we were going to compete on. They're slightly different. And that feedback helped me, because I realized that I was actually off the camera when I was in a competition, as opposed to when I was practicing. So that's something to be aware of. So Alex, similar question in terms of matching up the gestures. We've got our word count down to the magic number of under 800.
800
now,
people.
how do we match up our gestures?
Okay, so Toastmasters is all about lying, cheating, and stealing, right? So if you're in Toastmasters for a long time, you're gonna see Andrea give her elevator broken, and you're gonna say, "Oh man, that was good." And so you're gonna be cataloging what everyone has done all over all the ages, everything you've seen. Some people are good with gestures. Some people are great with movements. Some people just can do both of them. So you're gonna catalog what other people have done, and you're gonna steal it, and it's okay. Now, the other part, along with the iterative practicing that you do, like the more you do it, the more all of a sudden you should stop and say, wait a minute, from my 1 through 3, I could do blah this way, or I could do that way, right? So the more you do it, your brain should always be working. How can I tweak this? How can I tweak this? And eventually you're going to get to a point where you are, you're choreographed well. Now, I'll just say this. Some people are natural with their gestures and everything, and some people are not. So if you're not, you learn your limitations. I knew a guy who used to he'd be like, and we threw a touchdown and the game was over. And it was like, all right, you got to learn to throw the touchdown and have the game be over right at the, you know, proper moment. So again, that's also, if you have a good coach, they will tell you how your gestures look. Now, one final plug. I cannot wait till we get rid of this stupid Zoom thing and we are live in front of an audience, because that is an entirely different experience, and it's a much more exhilarating experience, and it really has a different skill set than Zoom. Not, I mean, there's a little overlap, you know, it's like those two circles that do this, but they're different beasts. And if you've ever done it in front of an audience, you know what I mean. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Alex. I think we'd all agree there's definitely a comparison between live and in the Zoom. And obviously with COVID, we've got a certain element of us that this is what we have. We're going to be doing presentations this way for work settings, for international, but you're absolutely right. There's also in lives, which is why I know we have a variety of different club options out there, you know, online, hybrid, and in person. So speaking of, I think, our audience, amazingly enough, we've already got to a halfway point. So as it was promising, wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. I think at this point, if you have a question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll go ahead and call on you, or I think Young may be able to unmute you. And if you feel more comfortable, you can also type in the chat.
Thanks, Mark. Don asked, for tall tale speech, what would be the ideal word counts?
I think, Alex, I think you had a big number on the word count. I'm not sure if it differs on tall tales, but any thoughts on tall tales versus the international one for speech count, for word count?
Well, I think the 800 is based on the 5 to 7 parameter. Let me just say this. I recovered a video of me giving a competition speech, you know, many years ago. I went and I looked at them and, oh, that's a pretty good speech. But then I went and looked at the actual text, and it was like 1,100 words. I'm like, oh my God, no wonder I didn't stand a chance, right? When you're giving a speech, if your audience falls a little bit behind you, they're trying to catch up with you. And so the 800 word count is all about making sure that you are in sync with them and they take in everything you say. And, you know, it's less is more. So I don't know if it's tall tales, again, I think it's all about the pauses. Word count really means pauses and using words economically. So, you know, I don't know what the time limit is for tall tales, but again, scale that down, get your calculator out. 800 is to 5 to 7, what, you know, X is to X. So keep it simple.
Yep. Thanks, Alex. Unless anybody else, any other panelist has anything else to add. Shane, you do?
I was going to say the word count is something I'm very guilty of. I usually have no problem coming up with additional things to say. Maybe a lot of us are additional ideas and content. For me, the struggle is always, you know, cutting it down and honing that main message. So along with what Alex said in the word count, just as you're going through speech, if it doesn't add value, if it doesn't add to your main message and point, remove it, right? So that will help you just really go down and really strongly filter, so it's really tight and concise.
Super. Okay, I see another question actually in the chat from Sue Amin. So thank you, Sue, for sharing. But one of the questions I think that was raised is, do you want to surprise your club members first in order to win the club contest? These are people that are obviously very familiar with you. So getting feedback would be between the club and area contest then, as a question, and is the first step to really try to win your contest at your club level. So I know that there's a number of you that compete at multiple clubs. Shane, I'm going to toss this one over to you first because you are in multiple clubs.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So I typically have often like practiced at my club. There is, at least from my perspective and, you know, my experience, right, there is, right, if you're practicing at your club in advance of the contest, they've kind of seen what you're going to present away. So there is that, you know, ability. Yeah, you have some members who will have seen it, so it's not you're not hearing it fresh and for the first time. So I personally have practiced it. I see, first and foremost, I see the contest as a way to improve myself as a public speaker. That's first and foremost my goal. So that's the way I approach it. And so I see it as, okay, the best speech is going to win. And I really, you know, I personally don't mind that some of my members may have seen the speech before, but it does, with that said, though, it does take away from some of that, oh, wow, like the wow factor, if you will, if they haven't seen it before.
That's good feedback. Andrea, similarly, you have multiple clubs, and even with that, you and Alex were collaborating. So let's say one of your competitors was seeing all of your material. Again, how did you feel about the fact that you were sharing that? And how did you perhaps surprise your club or not?
In my case, I didn't practice my speech at the club before the contest at all, at any of my clubs. So I gave the speech, and for every member of the audience, it was the first time they saw the speech. What I did before the club contest was I visited other clubs. So also like after the club contest, but also before. So you can just go on EasySpeak and find clubs that meet at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And then you can just write a message to the Vice President of Education and ask if they have a free slot for a speech. And many clubs are very open to offering you this opportunity. So this is something you can do before the club contest if you don't want to show your speech to your club members before that. And yeah, Alex, I met him at one of those clubs visits, and then he gave me feedback, and yeah, eventually we ended up becoming friends and supporting each other. So that's definitely something that is also a big benefit from the club contest experience for me, that you get to connect with so many Toastmasters in the district, but also like beyond the district. And it's not just about public speaking, but also about connection and networking. So definitely, if you want to have some feedback, reach out to other clubs. Most of them are open to helping, and are also very exciting about seeing a contest speech before the contest, actually.
That's fantastic, Andrea. I can't echo that more. That is phenomenal advice. And for any of you, I do highly encourage you to be taking notes if you're going through this, but that was excellent advice. I found that out only after winning at my club level. I think it was Meg Fosco and others recommended, oh, by the way, Mark, you can go compete, you can go give your speech at other clubs. I'm like, really? Other people want to hear me practice my speech? They said, sure, go ahead. And the question that popped in my head for a brief moment, which was asked, is, wait a second, am I going to be giving all my good information, my insight? Am I going to not surprise them? But then quickly, Andrea, to your point, I went back to that same thing. And Shane, you know what? I'm going to be growing. I'm going to be getting better the more I can deliver this. That outweighs, let's say, any competitive surprise secrets I may have that Alex sees my speech. Because what's Alex going to do? Is he going to rewrite his entire speech because he saw something? He may incorporate it, but it makes us all better. But I think we all grow together. So I think that's a phenomenal idea and phenomenal suggestion for any of you out there. Rather than trying to hold everything within, I would highly encourage you to share and go outside. But with that, George, likewise, you're also in 2 clubs. Any thoughts about what you kept secret and how you shared your speech material?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Well, I mean, if you go back to how I started this, I shared everything because that was my point. I wanted to get more feedback than ever before. So, and here's another thought. If you see someone else's speech and you start changing your own, you have to wonder, well, what are you doing in this contest anyway? Because if you start adopting other people's styles, you're gonna dilute your message. So I'm always careful about that, but I'm not concerned about sharing. But in my club, one of my 2 clubs, Princeton Toastmasters, in our club contest, we had 7 people compete in the international speech contest. So I take the club level contest as serious as I take the district. I really do, because you have to in my club. So that's why, as we started, I practiced my speech for almost a month before I even gave it in my club. And I had gotten feedback from some individuals, as I said, I selected particularly because they weren't competing and they could provide me very high level feedback. So this is one of those things where you get out of it what you put into it. If you choose to, you can be very, very prepared for your club contest. It's just a matter of how much work and time and effort you're willing to commit to that. Knowing that the contest is only a month away right now, it's time to start if you're considering competing in the contest in January. Mark?
George, I love that. I think one of the things that also strikes to me is that you wanted to get your message out. You wanted to share your message, what your speech was. And the more you got to practice, the better, more people got to hear it. that really also goes back to what I think I heard from Shane, when you were talking about, Shane, what your message was, how you developed your speech theme. It was an important one. See something, say something. You could save lives by doing that. So in some cases, having that practice or having that ability to share your message was something I think that was near and dear to all of our hearts when we're coming up with our theme. So I'll pause there to look and see, Young May, if we have any other questions in the chat, or do we have any other hands being raised?
I don't see another question in the chat unless I missed it, but I did see Sue raise her hand. Was it you want to ask a follow-up question, Sue? Or no? No.
No. If I raised it, it was an accident. The question I had asked was the one I had already sent it out in the
Okay.
chat.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Shane, you had something else you wanted to add?
Oh, I didn't know. Were you gonna? I know you had sent some questions in advance. I don't know if you were gonna ask some of those if the audience didn't have any additional. There was one I wanted to specifically touch on. That's the only reason I'm asking about. Why compete in the first place? What is the benefit to you in doing the speech contest?
Great question, Shane. So, I have a question for you. Why should we compete in the speech contest? I think George started to allude to it. We're getting close to that time, but say there's a person on the fence, not sure if they should compete or not. What advice or what would you share with that person, Shane?
Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I was very, very important for me. So when I start off in Toastmasters, for any of those here in the audience who have not competed in this Toastmasters speech contest, if you're new to Toastmasters, you're on the edge, if you will. When I started in Toastmasters, I really was a worst case scenario. I absolutely dreaded public speaking. It took me 6 months to do my icebreaker. I read it. I was a nervous wreck. So competing in the contest, my mentor, my home club had really encouraged me and said, Shane, just go for it and do it. And the benefit that I've had has been tremendous. I went from being extremely shy, introverted, wanting to avoid public speaking at all times, to now, and especially from a professional standpoint, I present to executives who are making funding decisions to provide funding to, in this case, the university where I work. And so I have to be able to, under high, if you will, high pressure, high stakes situations, be able to convey my message clearly, to articulate the value and, why should you support our university? Why should you fund our university? Why should you engage in that context? So the contests have helped me both personally and professionally from, again, getting, especially into that pressure situation. As someone who was extremely shy and introverted, the last thing I'd want to do is go into a situation where I'm, quote, judged. And so that was my mindset of, oh no, I'm being judged and I'm going to be criticized. But that was absolutely far and away from what actually was the case. And so, and just really quick story, when I first decided to do the speech contest, I won the club. I went to the area and I was extremely nervous and shy. And when I did the area speech, I remember I fumbled and I really was not polished to the level that I wanted to be. And I remember going over to get lemonade. I thought I'll drink away my sorrows. And a gentleman came over with his daughter and they came up to me. I'll never forget this. And he said, I just want to let you know, my daughter really appreciated, she saw that you were nervous, that you still went through and you did it. And she was a high school student at the time. And she, again, was like myself, extremely shy and introverted. And he said that, and she said, oh, thank you so much. You encouraged me to it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be fully polished. And so I never forgot that. Now, so you never know, who you're impacting as well. So just wanted to share that.
That's awesome, Shane. That's awesome. I think that we forget that. We think that for those of you out in the audience, you might look and say, well, here's a bunch of well-polished speakers and I could never do that. But we all fumbled and had to fail our way forward. And I will tell you that there's no better way to go forward than to fail. You put yourself out there, you go outside of your comfort zone. That's how you grow. And you never know that you may be impacting someone. As unpolished as you may feel, your message and your willingness to get out there, you may help encourage others to do the same. So thank you for sharing that there then. Andrea, same question. What advice would you give to someone who is competing for the first time and trying to think of, should I compete?
I would say you should compete, because there is no case that you will regret it in the end. In my case, I decided to compete because I was specifically looking for an intellectual challenge. I was at home with my son, and that was completely different from what I knew before. Like in Germany, I was working in a very intense environment, ICU, ER, and then suddenly I was here facing challenges that were not really challenging my intellect, just my, my patience maybe. So yeah, definitely worth investing time in such a project. And I didn't really expect it to come that far and to feel so confident on stage when speaking in front of an English-speaking audience. Like this right now, this panel discussion, that this is something I could never have imagined possible before competing in a speech contest. So overall, you become more confident, you become more self-aware of how you speak, how you deliver a message, what works for the audience, what does not. And as Shane mentioned, speaking in high pressure situations, I recently had 2 job interviews, and I can tell you, I feel like I really impressed them with how I present myself. Everything what I've learned in Toastmasters can be transferred to my personal and professional life as well. So definitely worth competing. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Andrea.
So Mark, we have Sue raise her hand, and in the chat, AL has a question.
All right. Let's see, Sue, do you want to go ahead and go?
Sorry, didn't mean to monopolize, but I'd have been already asking a question. But this is something has been back in my mind. One of my stronger speeches are more or less impromptu. I do better if the night before, if I saw a movie or do something, and then next day in the club, I have to talk about how I felt and what are the thoughts. And one time I was in the contest and the speaker wasn't there, and they asked me, can you give a speech? And all I thought about one of my personal experience, and I gave as a speech. And after 5 years, somebody remembered that. However, if I took the same speech, try to work at it, and read it, I totally fumble. And I don't know if anybody in the Toastmaster or in this audience is suffering similar issues, that if they took the speech and tried to polish it and present it again, became too conscious, or I don't know what happens, and it is not as impactful as the first time you give it. And since you guys have reached such a high level, you must have opportunity to see your first speech versus your final speech. And how did you manage to keep the essence of your speech and enthusiasm and that impact you did the very first time versus the very last time? And that's the question.
So thank you, Sue, for that question. So I think the question is, from the very first time, is how do you evolve it? How do you continue to get it grow better? How do you keep it from becoming stale and falling back, as opposed, how do you continue to add to it and have it grow over time? You know, Alex, I'm going to go ahead and let you have this first. I realize that you're also pressed for time, so thank you for the time you've been able to give. If you want to go ahead and take that first.
I picked up on something Sue said about, doing it once and it was kind of on the fly. And to quote the great Rod Stewart, her ad-lib lines were well rehearsed, right? So if you can practice, I think there's a level where you get your speech down, then you feed off the audience, right? And if your audience, when you look at them and they're deer in the headlights, you know it. You're like, you are mine. And at that point on, like, if your audience, if they're fumbling for their phone or looking elsewhere, yeah, no, you're done, right? But if you get it down and you get it tight and your audience is locked into you, my God, you control them. And that's just like, you suck all their energy out and you put it in you, and you give the show of your lifetime. So I think, yeah, can you have a bad day? I guess, but don't do it too often, right? And I think the more you do it, the more you just get the process down, right? And as Andrea said, it's like she went and did a job interview, and guess what? She nailed it because she took everything she's learned. So Toastmasters is iterative. You never lose information. You never lose skills. You just keep gaining more. So just every time you do it better. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Alex. And I do want to just go ahead and pause and say thanks to Alex. I know he has to drop off a bit early because he's got a personal commitment. So we want to just give Alex, thank you for your time, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Oh, no, my pleasure.
So I'm going to continue. There was another question. Actually, Shane, do you want to add on to that question?
Oh, no, go ahead. I
Addressing-
was just gonna, as far as, iterating, getting better, this goes back to George's, I believe, his original point about, and others, just make sure, initially, for me, it was about, getting what is the main message and getting the, at least a draft of what I want to convey together. But then at that point, you do want to seek out individuals who have experience and who can provide you with the right feedback, as was mentioned. So I just want to, so as long as you keep doing that, you can continue to tweak and engage audience reaction. And then it gets to the point of you're looking at line by line, right? How did the audience react to this specific line about this line? And then again, you work on, okay, I'm going to cut it. I didn't get, if it's a laugh, for example, you're expecting a laugh, but not everyone is laughing, then you're like, okay, that clearly didn't work. I need to switch it out. However, if the audience is reacting to it, then it's like, oh, I definitely want to star that, and that's sticking, that's staying in.
Yes. George, you have a follow-up to that then?
Yeah, real quick. Sue, I understand the issue of you feel more comfortable doing an impromptu speech, but the flip side of that is, okay, what's your key message? And what are the points that support that message? And by having gone through that process, you'll say, okay, I want to make sure I cover this material in my speech, because the worst feeling is when you sit down and say, oh, I forgot to say that. And then you feel like, oh, I'm such a terrible speaker. And then you start criticizing yourself. So the flip side of what you're saying is, yeah, sure, that first time it may be impromptu, excellent, but steal the essence of that and structure a speech around it. And then it's practice, because if you watch the people on the world stage, it's immaculate. I mean, those speeches are like unbelievable, but they're scripted to every single word and movement. So that just takes practice and evolution, but you can always take an impromptu speech and make it more formal. That's what we do, but that takes practice. So I would suggest trying that and seeing how it works for you.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, so just to add on, in terms of taking those prepared pieces, I think one of the things that I found was most helpful is delivering it to a different audience. Delivering it to a different audience. If you keep going back to the same people, it can feel stale because they aren't surprised. They've seen it a bunch of times. But sometimes that nervous energy that you had, perhaps the first time you stood up, if you're going back to the same group, maybe you don't have that nervous energy that second time. If you're going to a new club, as Andrea talked about, and going to visit other clubs, you'll be amazed at how that nervous energy will pop back up every single time you give that speech, because it's a new audience and they're seeing it fresh. And believe me, it will add energy back into your speech. So we had another question that came from the chat, which was from Al, which I'm going to direct to Andrea here, but it had to do with, is there ever a time that's too early to compete in a speech contest if you're a new member? So Andrea, you were 4 years in when you competed. Do you have any thoughts about how long or how new you could be to compete?
I think it's never too early to compete. I never competed in Germany because I didn't feel like I'm the person to compete. And here in the US, it felt like I have nothing to lose. Like in Germany, I felt like I have something to lose. I don't know why. So overall, I feel like I should have competed earlier. For the international speech contest, there is one requirement from Toastmasters International that you need to have completed level 2 in Pathways. So once you have achieved this level, you can compete in the international speech contest. And I don't think there's a time where it's too early. So when you feel ready, or even that, just do it, just write your speech, just compete so that you can grow and benefit from the experience and also share your message with the audience. So it's never too early.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to go ahead and echo that sentiment. I know that there's somebody out there in the audience that I want to give a quick shout out because it was my personal MVP for why I competed, which is Rose Yuan. So Rose, thank you. I just have to give a shout out to Rose because for me, I was relatively new back to my club. I was working my way through Pathways, and Rose approached me about competing in the international speech contest in which I needed to complete level 2, which was a number of speeches away from me. That provided the motivation for me to compete. But the other thing I want to highlight for Rose, one, that she saw that, but two, she was willing to ask. So I think that all of you out there, be willing to challenge and ask someone who you think has got that potential, because you may see more potential in them than they see in themselves. And you don't know what kind of service you're going to do to them by asking and inviting them. What's the worst they can say is, no, I don't think I want to do it. But you might be planting a seed and nurturing it and might help grow their confidence. And isn't that what Toastmasters is all about anyway? Shane, you have another thought? And I know that we have a question from Juanita.
Oh, so I was just going to emphasize that because that's an extremely important point with the contest. Make sure see it first and foremost, especially if you're starting out as a learning experience. And don't, I know, at least speaking from my personal, don't judge yourself too harshly. And that go into it with the mindset that I'm going to learn from this, I'm going to grow from this, and you will continually get better. I wouldn't, I'd be cautious on, please don't judge yourself too harshly, and don't view it that way.
Absolutely. So we may have one or two more questions, but Juanita, you have your hand raised up. If you want to come off of mute and go ahead and ask your question then.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to everyone, the panelists. You're really excellent. I've been a Toastmaster for a few years. Now I have my home club, and I'm in an advanced club because my goal was originally to become a paid speaker, but life got in there. My husband has Alzheimer's, and I probably am directing this question to Shane. And so I've given a speech about brain health and the difference in dementia, the differences between Alzheimer's, Lewy bodies, all the different kinds of diseases that come under dementia. And my advanced club gave me good feedback, and they said, you should really continue. But there's a part of me that won't let me continue with the speech. And I don't know what that is. So, maybe you could tell me something that would help me. Is it because this particular Alzheimer has a stigma, especially in the African-American community? And my husband and I have been on a couple of radio shows, trying to really get the word out and bring about awareness. So I guess I just have to keep fighting about why I don't want to do these speeches.
Wow.
So Juanita, I think just kind of paraphrasing, some of that is that you're talking about something very personal, very near and dear to your heart. And sometimes that's challenging and difficult, but yet you want to persevere through that. Shane, you spoke about something very personal. You want to kind of address what it took for you to be able to speak about that. Right
now, thank you, Juanita. That's a great question. And based on the topic that I spoke about, what I've gone through, and this ties in slightly too about that when you give a speech over and over again, it can become repetitive, if you will, but it's about the impact on the audience, right? And I hope that when I give a speech, at least one individual, not to be cliche, but for this is sincere, that one individual is going to be impacted by that. In my speech, it was sense something, say something, right? So I'm hoping that maybe one individual in the audience was hesitant going to a doctor. They didn't have a primary care doctor that they had a relationship with. And if they're sensing something that's off with them or someone that they know, they're either themselves are seeking out help, or they're encouraging someone to take them to get help. So that was sort of my main. If there's one person that I've helped by providing that speech, then my mission was accomplished. And so really keeping it about the audience, the impact, and dementia. You have there's so many individuals that could benefit from you sharing that message, and just keeping it that in the forefront that you really are helping so many people. And I know that for myself, I've been speaking as I am working on a book that I want to write, and I've been talking with individuals in the cancer community, seeking feedback again on honing that message, and how can I convey what from my experiences, what I've learned from others, to really help, and particularly again, for males, that again I've been told over and over again, the male population tends to have this hesitancy to go and seek out help, particularly medical attention. So I encourage you, please do keep spreading the word and doing what you're doing, and that you are going to save lives.
Thank you. I'll go it from because my husband is the person, and like you said, men hesitate to go to the doctor, take care. He was early diagnosed as diabetes, and he didn't take care of himself. That was before we met, before we got together. And that happens, people don't understand that it doesn't happen overnight. Your brain, when we didn't learn about our brain growing up the way they're now trying to get people to understand how important our brain and our heart work together. So thank you. I'll work on it.
Yes. Thank you for the question then, Juanita. I think that is, and for those of you that may have a topic near and dear to your heart, that was the case for me. My faith over fear, if you can read the sign, right? That was that's what inspired me to want to compete. When after Rose planted the seed to say, I think you're good enough, I'm like, what the heck am I going to talk about? And then it was, searching your own life experience and finding what you felt called at. Again, for me, I personally felt like I experienced a miracle, and that led me to wanting to share that, but it also wanted me to help broaden and get outside my own fear and inhibition about talking about faith to be able to do that. So, let that, perhaps for those of you who have the faith, just lean into that and see how you're called and what you're called to do and how to share it would be part of that piece. But we're pretty much at our time. So I just want to give a quick final lightning round question for our panelists before we do the closing roundup. Thank you, which is just, will we be seeing you competing in the 2022-23 International Speech Contest? So Andrea.
No, I'm not competing this year.
Okay, Shane.
No. Can I add one real quick thing I think is valuable too? Real quick.
ahead.
So for this, again, I really wanted to just convey about the importance of the contest. So, and that high pressure, high stakes situation. So I was presenting to an executive board of a multinational company. This was for $1 million investment. And just thanks to the contest, I was able to overcome my fear. And in the middle of this presentation, for example, I called up the president of the company and I said, have you used a paper towel this week? And it really caught him. He's like, where's it going with it? It conveyed to the technology we were working on. And it really drew him in. And I did that with the other executive board members. I never would have had the courage to call out somebody in the middle of a presentation like that and ask them a question like that, had it not been for the competitive situation and Toastmasters and becoming comfortable with presenting and knowing my audience. And so I just want to really convey that. But I will not be competing this year. I'm enjoying a break from it, and I want to support the contestants. And so I encourage you all to compete. Thank you.
All right, so George, the last question for you. You obviously won. Are you competing in any other final thoughts?
Tall tales, yes. International speech, no.
All right. Well, so there you have it. The International Speech Contest is wide open. So that's all the more reason that all of you in the audience should absolutely be jumping in to do it. And you can see all of us benefited greatly. One last piece, I will echo what Shane said. I personally felt like a high stakes environment. Years ago in my career, I had a certain sales situation that I was placed in where we were being interviewed for a multi-million-dollar project, 4 different teams. And it was my Toastmasters experience that gave me the know-how on how to prepare for a high stakes presentation. I was asked to do the closing arguments for that team, the multi-million-dollar one. The team ended up winning. I would have never had the confidence, never had the skills had it not been for Toastmasters. So I highly encourage you to use the Toastmasters, but jump in, compete. You will grow. You will get so much better by competing. So with that, please let me just close by congratulating and thanking all of our panelists for their time and wish you well.
Thank
Bye
you,
all.
everybody, for participating.
Thank you, Young May.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
George. Thanks,
Have
Mark.
an-
Thanks, Andrea.
Have a good holiday season.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.